Perfect. That sounds good. Thank you, Chris.
Perfect.
So welcome everyone today. All of us are very excited to be able to be with all of you today and talk about this important topic. On behalf of Mass Bio and my HR co-chairs, Cheryl Vaughn, Anna Wellens, and Chris Tamburini, we welcome you to today's interactive forum. For an icebreaker, we want to take a quick poll that you should be seeing on your screen. And in terms of the poll questions, we created kind of a fun poll to be able to get a sense of what all of you are, most afraid of. People without masks, sharks in the Cape waters, a second surge in mass, or not afraid at all. We've got this. And so we'll leave the poll up for a few minutes just to get a sense of the audience. And it looks like, probably rightly so, that many are afraid of a second surge. And no one, I'm surprised, is afraid of sharks in the Cape waters. So thank you for participating in that. We'll start the forum today with Pettis, the Director of Learning and Leadership at Metadata Solutions. She's going to set the stage for our breakout rooms to be able to provide feedback and suggestions when we do the readouts. We've made this interactive to be able to get a sense of what all of you are thinking and to really try to get a feel for different ways that we can all work together to try to make things as seamless as possible. We have leaders in HR who will be facilitating the breakout rooms. And so Kara, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. Morning, everybody. As Lauren said, I work at Metadata Solutions, and we are a data technology company in the clinical trials space. So I feel very fortunate to be working for a company that is actually part of the solution and trying to get some of the vaccines through the clinical trials. I actually think that's really helped the engagement at our company as well, which I'll speak to some of those points too. So to give you a quick snapshot, actually, I'm going to pull up my screen here so we can see. Oh, that's not the one we want yet. So I am going to take you just kind of through some overarching data around some of the topics that we're going to talk about, and to give you an idea of what the breakout room discussions are going to be. We've chosen 5 different topics based on, top themes that we've been hearing. Okay. First one being safety. So this one really being around thinking about reentry, how we're keeping employees safe and what everyone's doing in that space. The second one is around equity. So more thinking about, because I know a lot of us here will have essential and non-essential workers. So what is that looking like? Or performance reviews and things like that. Third one being around hiring. That one's probably pretty obvious. Hiring and branding, actually, I'll throw that in there as well. Retention, employee retention and engagement, and then just overall impact, business impact, and how that's impacting all of our companies. But before I get into that, I do want to share some of these stats that I ran into. So 3/4 of companies are looking at how they can use technology to help in the safety and in the re-entry. And 49% are using temperature screeners to manage that employee safety. So this is a stat that I found from Gartner and pulled from Gartner. So some of the things that I think about there in the safety space is, what are people doing in terms of re-entry? What conversations are you having? How are you getting employee feedback? Are you getting employee feedback? And then also, how are those decisions being communicated? I know at our company, a lot of people were like, well, how are we determining the high business impact roles that need to be in the office, and what does that look like? So what does that look like? The second one that I want to talk through, and I was doing some research, and I'd be curious where this group even fell on this, but IBM had done a recent study that says that 54% of people want to remain working from home. So this, I think, is also going to pose an interesting situation where we're now going to have more of that hybrid environment where we have a higher percentage of people working from home, less people in the office. What does that mean when we think about equity and we think about, are the people who come into the office going to be kind of favored? And when we think about performance reviews, is that going to reflect unfairly? So those are some of the things to be thinking about in terms of the equity. The other thing that I found interesting here is, again, through Gartner, only 30% of companies right now require a quarterly performance review and performance conversation. So I was thinking about this kind of in combination with getting that employee feedback and the importance during this time. A lot of the reading that I'm doing says that it's really important that we're setting short-term goals for employees and sharing, for the next 3 months, here's what we need to focus on, especially in times of the unknown. So I thought that this was interesting too, in terms of companies and how often the conversations are happening, and are we able to meet those needs to really stay in tune with what's important and give employees some direction. This next one, actually around hiring, comes directly from our VP at Metadata. So he had actually done some research from our internal data that shows that 41% of our diverse applicants were moving from submission to interview. So we saw a 41% increase. So, and it's interesting. So our company, again, we're hiring like crazy still and haven't really lost much momentum because of our involvement. And this increase, we immediately switched over to virtual interviews. We were prepared to do that. And so when we were talking to him about why we think we're seeing that increase for our diverse applicants, his take, and obviously we don't know and there's lots of theories, but his take is really that people, when they're interviewing, and they were interviewing from home or more virtually, were less thinking about, okay, would I want to grab a beer with this person after work? Or what would this interaction look like kind of culturally within our office, and much more focused on the actual task at hand and if this person could do those tasks. So I thought that that was really interesting. I'm curious to see where this trend goes over time. But things to be thinking about with hiring is, even what are some of your hiring practices? How have those changed? How can we kind of change those to make for a better experience on the other end? Also think about in terms of branding. So how is this going to change or influence your branding, good or bad? How do companies who take a stance on, no, we're all going back into the office, or businesses that you have to go back into the office for, is that going to impact the employees that you draw to the company? Now looking at that 54% of people that would prefer to work from home full time. I forgot to tell you guys, I'm going to actually pose more questions than answers. So this is really intended to get you thinking as you get into the breakout groups. Another one that I looked at around the retention, and this one I also found to be very interesting, is MIT Sloan has done a research, and they found that their collaboration actually seemed stronger after the pandemic. So this also, and this reminded me of a comment, someone in our business resource groups had said they actually feel more connected to people now after working from home and being remote. And I think part of that was people were making more of that deliberate effort to do, the virtual happy hours or connect with people in a more kind of personal way. But things to think about here, I think definitely I had a couple other points I wanted to make here. How is this showing up for you? Do you think that you're getting that higher collaboration, higher productivity, or not in terms of your businesses, and why or why not? Also, when we think about retention, I think for me, wellness also comes into place in that space. And there was another study that was done that shows that how people feel professionally has a high impact on their overall wellness and psychological kind of safety. And so I was thinking about that just in relation to what is our role as a company to supporting people and their wellness? Because obviously, and I just read a book called Together by Vivek Murthy, And he had referenced a Wharton School finding that lonelier employees feel less committed to employers and coworkers, right? So if we think about this whole continuum of supporting wellness initiatives with our employees is going to make them feel more connected to employees and to their companies, obviously increasing that engagement and retention and hopefully that stronger collaboration. So also just some things to think about there. This last stat that I have for you, and then we'll go into our breakout rooms, is it's actually based on, it's a company called Mind Gym that we use at Metadata. They're an awesome thought partner, and I consider, trusted people scientists as well. But they're saying, and their findings are showing, that in the UK, workers feel like they can get away with 2 hours and 20 minutes less work time every day without their manager noticing. So I thought this fit really well into the impact section, because in impact, we're really thinking about how are our businesses being impacted by this? Have we gone through layoffs and furloughs and things like that? Have we recovered from that? Have we had to do reduced hours? But then also in relation to this study here, are we going to start to see some sort of productivity impact? And I know at Metadata, we tried to get a sense with a manager survey a couple months ago about how they were assessing the productivity of their teams. And of course, everything came out really high. Nope, we're still overly productive. We're great, right? But now I think we'll start to see as the time goes on how that actually plays out. So just something to also consider in terms of the productivity of our teams. Okay, so hopefully that gave you some good food for thought. So let me set up our breakout rooms. So we are going to be placing everyone into one of the 5 different rooms. And as was mentioned, you'll have a moderator for each of the rooms, and there'll probably be about 4 of you in each of the rooms. And you'll have about 20 minutes to, first just get a sense of and introduce everyone who's in the room so you get to know other people on this call today. And then we're really just going to tackle what are kind of the top concerns that are in that topic and in that space. And then doing some brainstorming around what are some things that other people are doing to tackle that, or just other questions that it's raising that maybe we want to bring back to the group for some other ideas. We will give you a 2-minute warning. We will give you a 2-minute warning so that you know when to kind of wrap up the conversation. And also we recognize that you will be placed into a room. So if you're looking at this slide and you're like, oh, I'm really hoping for equity, it may not play out that way. But one of the things that we are going to do so that everyone can feel like you're part of each of the rooms is we've created a Google Sheet that will be available to everyone who's on this call. And what we'll be doing is we'll be populating this as well as people are reporting out, and we'll include this in the follow-up information. That way you can check out what the other rooms specifically were talking about, some of their tips for addressing that concern, and or this is a living document, so it can continue after the fact too. So if you have ideas that you've been really successful in and you want to share, then absolutely you can use the Google Sheet for that as well.
And Karen, right. Chris, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure to remind each room moderator what topic you have. So I did type them in the chat. Dave was impact, business impact, Mary Beth safety, Jeff hiring, Sarah retention, and Anna equity. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries, no worries. I think we're ready to get into the breakout room. So Leah, if you want to take the reins here.
Yep, all right, I'm just finalizing these breakout rooms here. Bear with me for 1 second. All right, I'm gonna unmute everybody and I'm going to send you on your way. So good luck and have fun.
As all of us are coming back, what Kara and I would like to do now is to start to get just some quick readouts from the moderators of the breakout rooms to get kind of a sense of what some of the discussions were. And again, as Kara mentioned, we're putting together a document that we'll share with all of you, and feel free to add input about some things that you're seeing, that your organizations are doing. The goal here is to really try to think about best practices to help make us as productive as possible. And so I thought maybe Dave, we'll start with you. I know you were focusing on the impact side, and so we'd love to hear for just a few minutes about some of the things that that you discussed in the breakout room with your members, and some maybe action items or suggestions people have seen that could help in terms of the impact end of things?
Absolutely. Yeah, impact is such a broad topic. I think everyone shared, where you sit really decides the impact of the pandemic. And we had startups in the group, and I come from Takeda, thousands of employees in the Boston area. So impact is not equal, I think, is one of the key takeaways. I think one of the hottest topics was how to maintain equity in the performance review cycle for those that have been coming into the office and deemed essential versus the work from home population. And the takeaways that were shared were, setting smart goals in quarterly chunks, having more frequent live conversations with direct reports and coaching managers to do that. And also considering how the pandemic may impact diverse candidates and employees more than others, especially caretakers of COVID impacted families. And major takeaway was keeping performance front and center, during these trying times. Some of the feedback that was shared was managers certainly seem to be overwhelmed. When reviews do come up, there can be a bit of a complacency or falling into a let's just get this done versus having a focused discussion. And there can be two camps inside of organizations. The folks that have been coming in and deemed essential, there's some growing resentment versus the stay-at-home group. Meanwhile, the stay-at-home groups perceive that they're working more than ever, even though there isn't a commute time. Their day starts earlier and ends later than ever before. And then our conversation kind of segued into how to handle that. And most companies have done something, whether it's a no email, no meeting Friday, carving out time for employees to take on development initiatives or side passion projects. One interesting idea was kid-friendly video events with leadership and teams on Fridays. And the Task Human app, which is focused on meditation and mindfulness, was a solution that was shared. But great conversation. I really thank everybody in group one for sharing. Learned a lot.
Awesome, Dave. Thank you so much. That was extremely insightful. And that might segue nicely into the group I was in with Anna, focusing on equity and such. And so Anna, would you like to share some of the feedback, some of the thoughts that we were talking about? It ties nicely into what Dave was talking about as well.
Absolutely. I think a lot of these have crossover. They segue nice, and they can also go off on tangents. My group discussed, equity in the workplace, and that can take so many different forms. In terms of, concerns, I think one of the biggest ones was not knowing what everyone else is doing, right? So there's definitely a decrease visibility. Even if you're having those Zoom calls on a weekly basis, it might be more team-based, it might be more one-on-one. So one of the things was, having more of those, whether formal kind of town halls on a weekly basis or having more of those informal kind of coffee talks, because a lot of things that also kind of don't occur are those informal conversations that take place in the workplace, which can lead to mentoring and all of that. So that's definitely one of the things. Another one is with the researchers kind of coming up against a lull at the very beginning. of the pandemic. So, you know, folks didn't really have much to do, and now they're kind of ramping up and making up for lost time. So there's definitely a concern for kind of burnout on the research side, because now they got to double down or maybe even triple down. But in terms of, you know, what are some things that would work or actually are in play already that are working, is having that additional HR stepping in and kind of having that additional conversation with hiring managers and managers so that they are better trained in terms of working with remote employees. Also understanding, okay, the goals that were set at the end of last year might have shifted or might not be able to be met. So being a little bit more flexible. I think that is really key to making sure that everyone is moving in the right direction. And that's, you know, I mean, I could go on and on and on. But I think, you know, what comes out of all of this is that need to continue the communication, right? You don't want to overload, but you definitely need to make sure that you have the touch points still at the right times.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anna, thanks.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add a couple of quick thoughts, if okay, Lauren.
Yeah.
One thing you were talking about reminded me of this. One of my favorite books is The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. And he talks about this idea of kind of the casual collisions, right? So I keep thinking about when I would go to get coffee and who I would run into, right? That's what's missing for me. So how can we recreate those kind of casual collisions in this virtual or hybrid environment, as some people go back and some don't? The other thing that you triggered for me, so from a learning perspective, what I'm starting to focus on for the second half of the year is compassionate leadership and doing training around that. So training our managers around how to support wellness efforts for themselves and their teams, how to be allies. So in this time of social injustice, looking at diversity, inclusion, and allyship. And then also just kind of the empathetic, compassionate leadership. And as we re-enter, how are you reconnecting with people and not focusing just on the tasks, but reconnecting and having those human moments?
Yeah, and one thing that we were talking about is even for, I mean, there's still hiring happening and there's new people coming on board. So it's even more important for the new people that join the teams to feel connected. Otherwise, you know, they may not be as impactful as they could. And so, Sarah, we'd love to hear from you about some of the retention and just some things that you talked about in your breakout room.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lauren. So actually very much connected to some of the things that the teams talked about, but with a few different pieces. So our focus was on retention, and what came out immediately was this idea of burnout, and that everybody, whether you're going to work every day in the office and feeling stressed about you know, being in the workplace, or if you're working extended hours at home because everyone's just got more on their plates, that everybody's feeling some level of burnout. And in the past, burnout at work, you had a reprieve at home with your own personal time, but now we don't have that either because life is surrounded with stress because of the pandemic. So we talked about some ideas around really a couple things. One was really focused on wellness and how do we help people just balance work and life and just have an overall better sense of wellness. And so a few ideas that came up there were actually one of our participants has launched a new sort of wellness challenge in their organization using this app called Wodify Rise, where it's all about giving individual challenges, these simple things that you sort of you're able to complete these simple tasks. It's, you know, I think Emily, you shared, it's things like, did you drink enough water today? Or, you know, did you take a walk? And there's some other interesting things in there as well. And you're not forced to do it, but if you do, you know, you get that credit. And they've also launched this social element to it where people are posting pictures and sharing their experiences with one another. So it's giving that connection back to me from my perspective on some of the things we just talked about around those casual connections, because they're able to have these casual conversations about, you know, some kind of activity they did, or you can see pictures of what someone did on the weekend and ask them questions about it. So it's was a really cool idea. We've done some wellness challenges, but this sounds like a little bit even more creative, and a great way to get a team to connect around something non-work related and also get some health out of it. So that was a takeaway I had. If anyone's interested, we can post the name of that app in the chat. I'll do that after I finish my update. And then also things like, how do you create those casual connections? So people are doing coffee talks and cross-organizational coffee connections. So it's not just your team, but how do you meet other people? Carving out time with for learning type topics, and how do you get more virtual learning going if that's something that individuals are working on. So we spend a lot of time on wellness as a way to help drive retention, because one of the concern is people feel like maybe the grass is greener somewhere else. It's easier to interview and get into other organizations now if someone's hiring, because you don't have to take the day off. You don't have, people are looking differently at candidates because those connections through the interview process a little bit different. So how do we help make sure that people still feel that connection in the workplace?
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Mary Beth, we'd love to hear from you about some of the things that you discussed around safety in the breakout room.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lauren. So I had a really great group. I had an opportunity to meet some folks that I had not met before. I had Al, Chris, Taylor, and Holly. Our group was a mix of small startup company and some large companies. So the one theme I would say, though, is that all of these companies are operating in a similar fashion when it comes to social distancing, ensuring there's the right populations in the building at the right time, staggering schedules. The top three concerns that all of us really came to a consensus on and that we're hearing is really overall safety of the employees as we continue to move forward. Another one of the concerns right now is the kids in the child care, especially the younger ones, because it's not really clear what will happen with daycares and child care and schooling. And the other piece, which I wouldn't call a concern because it hasn't been a concern yet, are employees that find they prefer to work from home if their job is not necessarily laboratory related, and will there be a sense of the associates or an employee who prefers to work from home instead of going to the office, especially if the track record shows that the productivity has been met. Some of what companies right now in terms of what we're currently doing to address safety have been, or even just in terms of having a collective group, is limited populations. Al mentioned that at his company where they have been working, that the cleaning crew has been doing pretty deep cleaning of their office spaces there. One of the companies is doing an internal contest with physical fitness and mental wellness. One of the things I thought that was really kind of special was what Cadent is doing, Holly, in Taylor's company, where their CEO has a daily meeting every day. They're a startup company of 20 people. So she'd gather them together every day, which it sounds to me is a great way to start the day with your leader, addressing the associates or the employees of the company and to, keep momentum going. Another common theme I heard from the group was manager or employee surveys. All of our companies have been surveying employees to kind of see how they're feeling, how they prefer to work. So that is something that if your companies aren't doing it, any one of us could probably help you with that. I will also give a shout out to Forma Therapeutics. Al mentioned his company had a successful IPO during the pandemic. So I guess nothing will stop an IPO. So, kudos to Forma Therapeutics. And other brainstorming ideas or other things we talked about. Chris mentioned at his company, they've put up plexiglass. At his company, even the non-lab associates or employees are going in. So they did put up plexiglass, and they do have a mask policy. At his company, they were doing some temperature checks and waivers, but it sounds like over a period of time they've stopped doing the temperature checks. However, if you do go into the office, you need to sign a waiver. So overall, really great, really great conversation, and refreshing to hear that we're all doing something similar to keep all of us safe.
Awesome, Mary Beth. Thank you so much. And Jeff, we'll end with you because companies are still hiring, and it's hard now in this virtual, interview environment and branding and all of that. And so what did you discuss in the breakout room, and what insights could you share with the group?
Absolutely, Lauren. Yeah, so it's interesting. There were a mix of, we had 5 people in the group. We had Amanda, Catherine, Keith, and Amiko. Both Amanda and Keith work at the same company. And, they had a mix of both hiring as well as some furloughs during this. And I think, everyone pretty much commented that, it's not easy to engage and attract both top talent in this market. And keep the caliber at the same level, right? I mean, the caliber of employees can't change, right? And while you might look for some new skills, right? You might look for some it might not be quite as important that the social interactions in the office are quite at the same level, right? So you might not be looking for someone who's going to be your best friend and you're going to go hang out at the bar and have a beer with after work, right? We're not doing those things these days. So that was the engagement and attraction piece was a common theme. But we also had this idea that do companies actually have enough space to put people, right? So one of our panelists had an actual they brought on new real estate right before the pandemic, and that allowed them to put people back to work and safely distance them, have workstations, and have separate printers for everyone so that it was safe. But I know a lot of labs that are packed quite tightly, especially if you're looking at incubator spaces and looking at some of these very small self-contained units. It's hard to distance your employees. So real estate is going to be a huge issue when it comes to putting people to work and getting people back in an office setting, especially in a lab. Was culture and engagement of new and existing staff, right? I think that was another concern that we all thought, making sure that you have that preserve the culture and preserve, what you've built, because, it's not easy doing this remote, right? Having all these ideas that you guys had, with leaders doing daily calls and having, people balance that work and home life, right? Because you're asking so much from people to work in in this virtual environment, right? So flexibility and having the ability to shift, right, and make decisions as we learn. We're learning from each other here today, right? These are all great practices, and I think putting these things in this Google Doc is going to be very helpful. But we all need to refocus and shift and understand that the demands of the pandemic are ever changing, and that hiring is not going to get any easier, right? People are nervous, and people don't want to be the new person in a new organization, in a culture where every person they meet, every friend they have is like this, right? Where we're sitting on a Zoom call, and that's not easy, right? So if you're looking for people who are currently gainfully employed in safe companies, it might be challenging, and it's certainly, I think every company out there. Biotech has been slightly impacted, but as we all heard, Al and Forma, financially, our markets are doing quite well in biotech. So it's competitive, right? And I don't think it's actually harder to attract and find great talent in this marketplace because people are nervous. So, and that was a common theme that we all talked about. Lastly, we talked a bit about preserving the culture and understanding what are some of the nuances that happen, whether it be PTO time, right? I think it was Amiko brought up, they are allowing people to take 5 extra PTO days, right, throughout the year, and it doesn't count towards anything, but balancing that work and home. Kids are not going back to school most likely anytime soon, or if they are, it's probably part-time. So we've got to have compassion and understand the human approach here, right? And deal with the uncertainty. So, yeah, that was pretty much what we spoke about. I don't know anything. If there's anything I missed, Catherine or Keith, or anything else you guys want to add?
I think we've tackled a lot in this hour. So just to do a quick wrap up, thank you everyone, Mass Bio, Lauren for facilitating, all of the moderators, and all of you for joining the call and sharing your thoughts. Obviously, we still have a lot of questions and not a lot of answers, but The hope is that we can continue to connect with each other on this call, connect via the Google Sheet. But we will be sending out a survey. We'll send out the link again to the Google Sheet to continue to share, but I'm happy to connect. I'm sure any of the other people on this call would also love to. So thank you all so much, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you very much, Kara.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Great.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Hi, Leah.
Send your ideas in.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks.
Yeah.